for folks to join, and we'll be right back. Thank you. Thank you for joining today's webinar. Today's webinar is Boosting Your Bottom Line, the Bags of Money Series Part 3, Working for Your Money. And my name is Boris Vilgorin. I'm with the McSilver Institute and CTAC. And today I'm joined by my colleague, David Wozniak, who will be co-presenting with me on this, and he'll introduce himself as well later on during the presentation. Just some housekeeping before we get going, just to let folks know, if possible, we recommend that you call in using your phone and not the computer. So if you have called in through the computer, we would recommend you using the phone. But again, if that's not possible, that's okay. We also want to let folks know that this slide deck is already available on our website at ctacny.org. And if you look at the chat box, you should see the link to that. So if you want to access that during the presentation, you're more than welcome to do that. And as always, we request that you submit the questions throughout the presentation and that you use the chat box. If possible, please, when using the chat box, select all panelists to send it to, and we'll be conducting the Q&A at the end of this presentation. This presentation is also being recorded and will be available on the CTAC website probably within 28 to 48 hours or so after the presentation. But the slide deck is already available, as I said before. So with that, we'll jump right into the presentation. And again, this is part 3 of our 4-part series. And today's presentation really will focus on productivity and motivating your workforce, especially as it relates around productivity. And as I said, at the end, we'll be doing questions and answers as it relates to this series. So a couple of data points and information just to give folks some perspective on how productivity impacts, an overall financial health of an organization. So the slide you have in front of you and what you're seeing is assuming that, your agency, and we actually have here, because we know different agencies have different work week hours, some work 35, 37 and a half, 40 hours, and so forth. If your productivity standard, as an example, is set to 45% of somebody's hours are billable compared to their work hours, how this looks in that comparison. With the next slide, what you can see is if you just increase that billable hours to 55%, meaning a 10% increase, and overall, your agency can increase approximately 13% in revenue. So a 10% in hours, at least in this scenario, and we'll talk about hours and units and a lot of other, elements that it comes up to it. So this is just kind of a starting point and an example of how productivity impacts. So again, in this example, if you go up to 55 hours, it could potentially increase your revenue 13%. And so what does 13% really mean? It doesn't sometimes seem a lot, but just to give folks a perspective, so if you have an agency where your annual revenue is $120,000, that's a little bit over $100,000 in gain. Agency B, twice the size or so, you're now talking over $200,000 in gain. In Agency 3, again, 2 times our large or, clinic in this particular instance, could potentially be $426,000 gain in revenue. And when we talk about productivity and we talk about gains in revenue, I think it's important to also underscore that productivity, when there's gains in productivity and gains in revenue, there's almost no or minimum increase in expense. So these are pure, for most part, or net gains that are obtained without limited expense. There might be some expense associated depending on your billing system and some of the other infrastructure, but this is not, we're not talking about hiring new staff. We're not talking about hiring other types of staff. This is literally a gain by a particular individual that you already hired and paid for, and increasing their productivity target, or meeting their productivity target, I should say. So again, this just gives you an example of what a potential 13%, even for a smaller clinic or agency with only $120,000 in revenue could bring in. So why is this important? Well, very clearly, it's important to the financial health, of course, of the organization. But again, in our opinion, a successful clinic, especially in this environment, will really need to combine quality with sound business practices. So, these are the two, kind of pillars, if you will, of this, right? You have quality, but you can't forget the business practices and the ability to set standards and measures and communicate those results. Is critical. And so there is lately a lot of discussion about outcome measures and data and metrics and so forth about quality, and that should happen and it will continue happening, and it's very important. But we cannot forget that similar or same type of discussions need to continue on the business side of it as well, where there's discussions on what the standards and measures. On the positive side, even, there's some confusion or still the waiting component of what are the quality measures. On the business side, they have been developed and in practice for many years. So it's not about waiting to know what those measures are or what those standards should be. It's more about implementing and understanding them and really making sure your organization follows them. And again, to kind of underscore the importance of productivity, the more challenges the team has in meeting their productivity goals, clearly will have more difficulty in becoming the clinic as a whole staying in business, right? So that is one of the key components as well. And so why do programs have difficulty sometimes meeting their productivity targets? You got to kind of step back for a moment, especially if you're the business person, the billing person, finance person in your organization, and kind of step back and think, and realize that clinicians who we're talking about here, right, when we talk about productivity, are not trained in productivity, right? They're training, and then this is what we want them to be trained in, is in arts and science of clinical interventions, right? This is what they're hired to do. This is what they do best. But what we need to do together with the clinicians and with the workforce is to really, understand and make sure that everybody's on the same page, to kind of understand how, it's important to be both, of course, clinically, to be a good clinician and provide good clinical intervention, but also to be effective and efficient. It's very important as well. And the pressures will only increase as we move to value-based reimbursement, when revenues will be affected by measurable clinical outcomes. So both of those traits and those skill sets that clinicians already come with in regards to clinical interventions, but need to be combined with measurable business. And we very much know, despite all of these increasing demands, the staff out in the field are doing an amazing work. So it's not about the work, it's about, how do we combine business practices and productivity discussions together with those clinical practices. And that's what makes it difficult. It's not one or the other, it's really both. So productivity as a primer, right? So there's a couple of ways usually, programs look at productivity or measure productivity, I should say, right? One way to measure, as the slides, the beginning slides I talked about, you can measure them in billable hours. Excuse me. And so what does that mean? It's just the amount of time, again, usually calculated in hours, that a clinician is engaged in providing billable services. So if I work a 7-hour day, you add up all the minutes I'm doing billable services, and at the end, what are my billable hours? Another way of looking at productivity is units of service. And that is, related to billable hours and could be related, but it's really measuring and looking at it through units of service. And that means there's the number of billable units versus hours that a clinician provides. You assign a value to each type of a visit or service, and then you add those up together to measure productivity. And so that's called, measuring through units of service versus billable hours. So how does one decide which one to use? There's preferences, we have recommendations, but at the end, I think, as you'll hear the theme, and I'll say it a couple of times, and I'm pretty sure David will do it as well, is it all boils down to, does your agency have a standard approach that everybody can actually understand, knows what it is, and it's agreed upon? But it's important to, when you start thinking about, do I use billable versus units, is to look at the available data in your EHR and billing systems to determine this. So you got to look at what reports are available that you can run, right? That will give you the information. Which ones are the most accurate reports? Because again, if things are not set up correctly or are not used properly, you might not be getting the right information. And what's the easiest to get? Again, you might want to go with the units as a way of measuring things, but if your system currently has no capability of producing units and you can't set it up to use units and only produces billable hours, that might create a problem. It creates additional work, and it creates confusion among staff. So it's important to first look internally to see what's available, what's easy and what's accurate. And then, maybe if that's not the way you want to measure productivity and you want to move to a different way of measuring it, have a plan that you put together. But the first, our recommendation is first see what you can get and see how you can work with that piece of it. So an example here, and just, again, this is just an example, and it actually, if you look at the OMH website and OMH, the APG rates, and kind of the chart that's out there, this has, information, it comes from there. And if you are thinking about using units as kind of as a value here, here's a chart as an example you can put together for your organization that says, if somebody does a 90791, your unit value would be 1.03. You can go to 4 digits, 2 digits, but that would be a nice, simple, straightforward chart that all staff would get, right? So if I'm a social worker who does maybe predominantly 45-minute individual psychotherapy sessions, and so my big component is 90834, I know that majority or good portion of my services, each one will get a unit of 0.8275. Again, these are not something you have to adapt as kind of the unit value. It's recommendation. It's something that you will see at OMH's APG manual. But the key here again, as I said before, is that people know what it is. It's in front of them. They understand it, and it's kind of something that folks can then use in a way to kind of organize their work and see how would I really meet those productivity and meet those targets. Again, if the targets are not set as clear and understandable, it creates confusion. Staff need to understand that what is my annual target, what could be my weekly target. Sometimes it's even helpful to talk about what is the daily target, from it, and what are my expectations. You have part-time staff, full-time staff, and it's important to break that down. And as a staff person, I would really appreciate to have something like that, the chart, and have that. Also, I think it's important to help clinicians understand how productivity goals are determined. Sometimes, folks get a sense that they're just picked out of, air, or somebody, has no clue what they're doing or picking productivity targets, or they're somehow, are not reachable and are not considerate of other things. And so I think it's important to have those discussions and explain what the thinking behind was and how those were put together. And of course, as I just said, make sure that the productivity expectations are achievable, and that people can actually reach those goals and reach our financial goals as productivity translates into, the financial piece of your organization that puts together and is part of your budget development. So with that, I will actually now transfer and transition this presentation to David that will walk you through the rest of the presentation and then take us to the Q&A portion. So David, it's all yours, and I'm going to just transfer the ball to your court.
All right. Thank you very much, Boris. Let me catch this here. My name is Dave Warsnick. I'm a senior consultant at CCSI, and for some 34 years I've been the Chief Financial Officer at Spectrum Human Services here in Western New York. I'm going to take, as Boris said, I'm going to run through a couple of the rest of our slides, and then Boris and I will work together at the end to answer some of the questions that you might have. So Boris is talking about, figure out what units you're going to be counting. I think everybody really is doing something right now. I think the question then becomes, is it working for you? Is it, do you have some legacy ways of counting that are not really precise enough for what you need right now? Do you need really, what data do you have? Do you have better data that you can use? So really, sort of asking people to take another look at this whole productivity piece. It is a critical aspect. If you were involved with CTAC back in the early days, we did a lot of fiscal modeling, and one of the key components that we always came back to in the fiscal model, the revenue generation, and the bottom line was your productivity. There's been a lot of conversation about productivity over the years. There's been different offerings, a way to address this. But I think we're coming up to a time for a lot of folks that it's worth another look to see if the processes you have in place are working for you. So we've gone through, we've set up our units of service, we've worked those units of service to make sure that if they're met, that we're going to meet our financial goals. We've sat down with our staff. We've gone through the way that we go through with them of what their unit expectations are, how we're defining the units. We give them sort of tools and tips to help them understand that, and then we work with them directly. And so now we're at the stage that we've got our infrastructure set up, we're ready to go. Now we have to start thinking about how we're going to work with our staff. The first thing that we want to talk about is monitoring expectations. One of the things that we look at here at Spectrum is that what's a reasonable amount of time that it should take for a new hire to move to meeting their productivity expectations. And we've really landed on 3 months as a good amount of time. Now that because you have a new clinician coming in, they're usually coming in, they're going to take over a portion of the caseload. It's very rare that when a clinician leaves that their full caseload gets transferred. They're going to take a portion of the caseload, they're going to start doing assessments, they're going to start getting an assignment. You need all the rules, and they need to figure out the EHR. So there certainly is a learning curve that's specific to your agency. But we find that 3 months is really a pretty decent amount of time for people to get up to speed on their productivity. That's assuming that you have good flow, client flow into your clinic, that there are enough clients to meet your staffing that are required by your staffing plan, but 3 months is probably a good amount. The other thing that we want people to think about, you really need tools and reports to monitor units of service on weekly, at least a monthly basis. We'll go through a couple of examples or an example on the kind of tools and reports that might be helpful for people. But you really need to be able to work with your staff at least on a monthly basis to take a look at what is expected of them and how they're doing against that expectation. And then you need to actively work with clinicians in supervision, and our recommendation is you implement performance improvement plans when necessary. You know, everybody sort of can, if you step back and you take a look at your staff, you know, your staff sort of stratify. There are people who can make their units of service. They do it consistently, and you know then that your units expectations are achievable. There are some staff that struggle a little bit. They're up and down month over month, but in generally they're trending towards being able to make their productivity. And then there are always staff who struggle right from the beginning to make and maintain their productivity expectations. So you really need to, in your supervision, to work explicitly with those staff. Begin thinking through, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, what are some of the factors that may be contributing to their inability to make their productivity. But you need to have you need to have a plan in place. I mean, you really need to address this at the clinician level quite quantitatively. And so, you know, if you sit down with somebody, okay, you've been here for 3 months, we've been assigning plenty of clients, you have a standard size caseload, but your productivity is at 75%. So here's the plan that we're going to put in place. Over the next 2 months, you're going to do this. I'm, as a supervisor, is going to do this. We're going to monitor it more closely. Whatever that plan is, very explicit kinds of changes in behaviors, either of your clinical staff or your scheduling staff. You need to be pretty clear about this. It's not just that you can leave it up to your clinician's own devices. It's not as simple as saying, okay, you need to do better. You really need to work with people in a performance improvement plan, if written correctly, can be a positive experience for people, but it's pretty direct about what the expectations are, what the timelines are, and what the consequences are going to be if they fail to meet the goals and expectations. It's not, I mean, think about it this way. So if you have 10 staff and half of them are not making their productivity, and add up those units that you're missing, it's a pretty sizable number of units, and attached to that the revenue, and it's a pretty sizable amount of revenue. So work really closely with your staff around the performance and try to work with it around a more positive experience. It really shouldn't be punitive. It should be empowering. You as a supervisor should help empower your staff to work more efficiently. So monitoring. So this, I like visualizations. I like to see things. I don't, you know, sort of reports that come with a list of people and a list of numbers in 4 or 5 different columns and going over to a next second page. That doesn't work real well for me. I look at too many numbers. I try to figure out relationships within them. I sort of overthink it. So what I like to do and talk with people about is helping your staff see what's going on. So here's an example of some of the kind of visualization tools that we try to apply to monitoring of productivity. And you know, some of the pieces of what we try to do is try to make it simple. We try to put a lot of information into sort of a small area, a small footprint. So here's an example of my productivity report. You'll see that the blue bars are my billable hours. This is an evaluation of billable hours expectations. So you can see a longitudinal. I always like to show people data over time. Particularly if you're doing a performance improvement plan with somebody, you really need to be able to allow you as a supervisor and them as a staff to be able to see the progress that they're making over time. So the bar graphs sort of show me where I am. That orange line across the top is my expectation. So in a real quick visualization, I can take a look at that and say, okay, I made it in August, I made it in September, and I did some really good work through June and September to get me over, and now I'm starting to fall back down again. Why might that be? But it's a good visual, quick and dirty way of seeing it. And I would like to mention that we will the next CTAC presentation that we'll be doing in this series is 2 weeks from today on the 26th, that we'll be working exclusively and talking about these kind of dashboard kind of reports and how you may think about putting them together, what are some of the best practice rules around that. So we'll be looking at this much more clearly, much more in depth in 2 weeks. So you have that chart, and then you have the second piece over there that gives me my numbers. So I've added 2 additional columns here. One is a percentage of my goal, and you'll see in that middle column over on the right, I have these little indicators. Well, 73% is yellow, and that's not really good. 101% is green, that's great, and then the 72 and the 61 and the 70 is really not very good at all. So again, not only do I get to look at the chart against my expectation, I have another metric and another simple and quick way of just looking at, and you know, this is these kind of dashboard concepts. My eyes are drawn to the red because those are the pieces that need attention, and you'll see that we're seeing a trend in the last 3 months here that we need to address. The other piece that I had added in here is a show rate. Now, a lot of us always talk about no-show rates, and I know this is a subtle difference, but it's sort of looking at the data in a more positive light. That is, what is your show rates? And it's an interesting, so if I was looking at this as a supervisor, and if I was going to try to make sense out of all this, I'd look at the December in 2015, and I'd look at the fact that my percentage of goals was 61%, but my show rate was 93%. Now, 93% show rate is a pretty high show rate in our industry, so that starts giving me a little bit more information. So no-shows, at least it eliminates no-shows as the problem in December, and I'll be talking a little bit more as we go on of some of the things that you may want to drill down into to figure out how is it that my percentage of goal was so low and my show rate was so high. We have the same thing in January, so there's something else going on. So like I said, so you have this at a glance, but it also gives you some of the information that you're going to need to start teasing out what's going on here. So you sit down with one of your clinical staff, and you would take this and then look at some of the other data that you have available to you to see if you can identify what's been happening here in the last 2 months that may need to be addressed. So again, something simple, add a little color. Think about showing people information over a period of time, and then I hope you can see that you can get a lot of information into a really very small space. So I've been talking about this in the visualization, communicating with staff clarity, accuracy, and timeliness is essential. You can't have a monitoring system of productivity if your staff get their productivity data 2 months after the fact. You also can't have a good monitoring system if you provide your staff with information that at the end of the day is not accurate. I tell this story a lot. When we started years ago doing our productivity monitoring and giving people information back, I don't know how many questions I took from people about, well, I added up my units and it's this, and, you know, your report says this, and, you know, that went on for a period of time. And there were two issues. One was there were some errors in the way that we were aggregating our information, so there was an accuracy issue that we addressed very quickly and moved on. But, you know, it has to be clear, it has to be accurate, and timeliness is just essential. I can't, you know, I can change my behavior, but if there's 3 months already gone, you know, you've lost 3 months of opportunity to work with your staff around their performance. Show accurate, I've mentioned this before, show your actual activity month over month. It's really critical. So if you're doing a performance improvement plan, even if you could go to a weekly basis, I need the feedback. I, as a clinical staff who's working on improving my performance, I need the feedback, and I need it in real time to help me and help you as the supervisor understand first of all, the first question is you start a performance improvement plan and you make an assumption about what the problem is. Well, if you fix the problem, is the productivity changing? If not, you've misread the problem, and you need to know that as quickly as you can so you can sort of shift gears. Okay, and we thought it was this, but oh, look, you know, you've made the changes that we required, but your productivity is still low, so maybe we missed the mark on this. So that continuous feedback to you as a supervisor and a clinician is important. You need to know that you're working on the proper issues as you try to address performance, and you need to know if you're off base. You need to know that as quickly as you can so you can switch gears, and you know, it's the continuous quality improvement. You need the feedback to know if what you're doing is working. And, you know, charts or graphs, I like to see things. I think most people like to see that too. It's clear, it's easy, and, you know, your eyes are drawn to the areas that you really want people to focus on. The other thing interesting is how you talk about and communicate productivity to your staff. I've worked with a lot of agencies around the state, and, you know, there's no right way of doing this. And what I'm really talking about is sometimes productivity metrics are only communicated to individual staff their productivity. So they don't know what their colleagues' productivity is. They may not know the aggregate of their site's productivity. So we keep this productivity monitoring and information really pretty close at hand. Another way of doing this is that you sort of open up so everybody knows who everybody else's productivity looks like. They also know the aggregate productivity for their program. They know where they fit into the organization and where they fit into the program. There's no really right or wrong way of doing that. Here at Spectrum, we've determined or decided that we want to be transparent about that. In fact, our productivity monitoring system is on our intranet site, and it's in a site that's open to all, to the entire organization. So if they wanted to, nobody really does, but if they wanted to, anybody could go in and check out productivities of any individual staff. A lot of people don't like to go in that direction, but if we're working with our staff in a positive way, around increasing their productivity, and we're not blaming them as an individual, or we're not the culture in the organization is not to assume that they're lazy or they're not working hard enough or they don't know how to do it. If the culture in your organization is around empowering your staff, about positive improvements, around a shared goal and an understanding of what you need to do, then this kind of transparent environment is an environment that can be empowering to people and need not be something that you're afraid to do. But it's really related to your culture. So it's not a small thing. You need to really be thinking about what's the extent of communication, how do you want to do that, how do you want to treat the concept of productivity in your organization. And then when communicating to staff, I had mentioned this, you need to provide show rates and see if you can figure out why some of your staff might be struggling. And I'm going to come back to this. Look for your staff with low no-show rates as a guide. I mean, we talked about this. You have people who do productivity well. You have people who have very high show rates. What is it about what they're doing? I mean, use your people as a guide to understanding what works and what doesn't work in your environment. And it could be, I mean, everybody's shop is different. Everybody's, the way that they're oriented, their workflows are oriented, so there's no cookie cutters. But I think if everybody stepped back and looked at this, there are some of the folks in some of the clinicians that are doing very well in these areas. Well, look to them as a guide. See what they're doing right. Try to figure that out, and then use that learning as a tool in your supervision for people who are struggling. I mean, I've seen concepts where people sort of, particularly for new staff, they take one of their staff who's doing well in these areas, and they mentor some of the newer staff and really help them understand the processes that they've put in place to be successful in this area. So, don't be always looking to the outside. Look internally to see if you can see what may work and what may not work. So provide incentives for your staff. So there's some real quick, you can give higher unit values for providing services in language other than English. If you looked at so you can use your unit of service piece to the way that you value your units to change people's behavior. We've talked about this in the last couple presentations, is that, properly recording complex care management, time that they're spending that they're not getting credit for. If they put that into the system correctly, then they're going to get more units for the time that right now they're not getting. Help staff understand how to provide best practice groups. Groups are a very efficient way for folks to be able to address their productivity issues. We talk about best practice groups, but certainly this is an efficient way and in many cases an effective way for providing services. And find simple but meaningful ways to recognize performance. So, one of your clinics reaches 97% of their productivity goal in 1 month and they get a free lunch, or, that you don't send folks notes. If you reach your productivity on a monthly basis, you get a note from the supervisor or the clinic director or the executive director. Thank you, congratulations. You're doing a great job. We value what you're doing. So, it doesn't always have to be money. It can be thinking of ways of identifying and rewarding people for meeting expectations. And sometimes they're simple, and sometimes they're just personal, and they don't have to cost a lot of money. So your supervisor's experience, you need to use tools in supervision to help your staff understand the impact of their productivity. I'll show you a couple of those real quick. It's helpful to show how factors such as time off, scheduling, service mix, and group sizes affect productivity performance. I'll touch that a little bit. And also help empower your staff by suggesting strategies that might help their performance. Again, look to your high performers. You've got people inside who know how to do it. So here's an example of a supervisory tool. Use of leave time is sort of an important aspect of whether people make their units of service or not. I'm not going to go into this pretty in any detail, but it does, we've talked about before, people need to know what their expectation is. So in here, they know what their billable units are for the year. They know what it is for the month. They know what it is for the day. This sort of display calculates what you're scheduling, how many appointments, your no-show rate is 10%. That means to meet your daily goals, you have to have at least 5.5 sessions scheduled, if it's a scheduling problem. So you have tools that help people understand what their expectations are and how they can begin organizing themselves to do that. Here's another quick tool. One of the concepts that people have, if you take a look at here in July, an individual is going to have a holiday. They're going to have the 4th of July. And they're probably going to take a sick day, and they're going to take 2 weeks of vacation. So suddenly, they're only physically available on site to 58% of the time to provide units of service. Well, it's impossible that they're going to meet the unit of service expectations in that month. So we have to help people understand how the flow of their leave time utilization affects their productivity. So they know there's impossible that you're going to meet productivity in July. So it's important that you think about exceeding your productivity in months that you use very little leave time. So this is just a way of helping demonstrate that to people as much as possible. So if you're going to go ahead and change your unit of service format, then you need to implement it in a sort of a thoughtful way. And some of the things we're suggesting is that you create a work group committee and develop and update the management. I mean, do it as a group. Include your supervisors, finance, compliance, management, your clinicians certainly. Get everybody on the same page about this. And, meet regularly. This is a CQI project. It's really, you're going to be changing your productivity because you want to increase the quality of that kind of monitoring system. And so, really put it into a CQI framework. So if you're going to be troubleshooting, the question is, what do you look for? Well, poor scheduling practices, that certainly could be a problem. If people aren't scheduling enough visits on any one day, you schedule 3 visits, but 3 visits never gives you enough units on that day, well, and then you put a no-show factor on top, that could be a significant. Insufficient caseload size. Somebody could have too small of a caseload, and they just can't generate the units necessary out of that case, or the caseload could be too big, and they're just sort of overwhelmed, and they're missing people, and people are no-showing, and they're not following up, so take a look at caseload, or it could be poorly distributed. You could have an individual with a caseload of very high-need, high-use individuals, and that just take more time, and then they struggle with some of the other areas. Poor time management, we're not born knowing how to manage our time, so, look at people, how they're managing their time when they're doing their progress notes, things like that. Poor engagement skills, it usually relates to no-shows. Some of us are, and some of your clinicians are very good at engaging their clients. Some of them are not. If you have poor engagement skills, you're going to see cancellations. You're going to see no-shows. So that's something to take a look at. And again, excessive use of leave time. If you have somebody who uses every single sick day as soon as they earn it, I will guarantee you they will not make their productivity. So take a look at how people are using their leave time, because that could be a critical aspect of this. And so making changes across the board, some of the things that you may want to think about is the medical modeling, scheduling. If your clinicians are still scheduling their own visits, you know, think about that. You need to really have a sort of a centralized scheduling process where you can not only evaluate how people are scheduling, but make sure that they're properly filling it in. Backfilling canceled appointments, this sort of addresses some of the no-show issues. If you know that somebody can't make their appointment 2 days from now, do you have somebody that you can slide in there so that doesn't end up into time that is not being, that we're not providing clinical services. Concurrent and collaborative documentation, you know, you've heard about that for a couple of years. It certainly is an efficient way of doing your documentation. If you have folks who have scheduled paperwork time in their schedule, you need to really take a look at whether this could significantly impact your productivity. Open access, groups for chronic no-shows, you know, take a look at that. And the other thing folks have been taking a look at is fee-for-service part-time positions. That's really outside of the scope or the time that we have for today's presentation, but that certainly is one of the ways that people address this issue, that is that you hire a fee-for-service clinician and you pay them for completed services, and then you don't pay for the capacity that you lose when a client no-shows. So I sort of ran through that last piece pretty quickly in the interest of hoping to keep some time available for questions here. So I'm going to open this back up to Boris, who's been monitoring the questions. So Boris, if you'd like to sort of read some of the questions out loud, and then you and I will figure out who wants to answer them.
Sure. Thank you, David. So yes, we did get a couple of questions or so, and again, folks, if you're interested in asking questions, please chat them in, as we will go through them at this time. So our first question, and I believe we might have gotten this before, and this might actually be for Lisa Clark, who's joining us from OMH. And the question is, can an Article 31 clinic bill 99051 evening and weekend charge for legal holidays? I believe the answer is no, but
and here I thought you weren't going to need me for a cameo today, but
there you go.
Yeah, we did get this question previously, and we're going to go with the answer for this is no, because it's too hard to define what different legal holidays are and what days they occur on, and so it's very clear when you have evening hours or weekend hours. So no, you cannot use 99051 for legal holidays.
Okay.
And I think the next one might be for me too also, Boris, so I'll just keep going.
Yeah.
It says, can you please confirm that the unit value for complex care is meant to read 0.2896 and not 02896? So that's a good catch. And actually, so there's like kind of a double, yeah, so you could pull that up there. In fact, when we get to it, okay, so on the very bottom line there, this was pulled, I'm going to guess, from an old chart, because complex care management is now in 5-minute units. It's no longer 15-minute units. So the correct weighting value right there should be 0.0965.
Okay. 0.9. So we will make sure that we will
0.0965.
0.096. Okay. Well,
right, because it's only 5 minutes. So.
Right. So we will make sure that we'll update this slide and make sure that it has the right unit value. And thank you for the question and catching that. And Lisa, thank you for clarifying it. But again, just to let folks know, this was just an example. You know, but still, we want to make sure that it's even as an example is accurate, and that folks can use this or other unit calculations as they feel are more appropriate for their agency. But yes, we'll definitely make sure to update this appropriately. Next question that we got Well, the tools mentioned on slide 8 can be made available for download in Excel file format and was done with the revenue calculator. That's an interesting question. So I guess the two tools, David, you went through. Go ahead.
You know, Boris, this is a tool and that had been posted to the CTAC website. I forgot the name of it. I should have included in the slide. I apologize, but it is a tool that was created about probably a couple of years ago for the CTAC, one of our CTAC offerings. It is available. If it's not posted to the CTAC website, I have the most current version of that, certainly, that I use for this presentation, and we'll get that posted back out. It's I think it's a productivity monitoring tool.
So it should be on our website. You're saying at CTAC.
Yeah, we'll check. And if it's not, it'll be up on the website within the next 24 hours.
Got it. Great. Thank you. Next, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Boris, I want to jump in here and just acknowledge, like, a really nice shout out to Boris and Dave for this presentation. That somebody noted this is one of the most useful webinars so far. So kudos to you guys for putting this together.
Thank you.
And, yeah, thank you. And thank you for, Lisa, you mentioning it because it would have been awkward for me to say that. But yeah, thank you. Yes. And so we have another question here. Where can we find the unit value suggested by CPT codes? Are these available for medical, dental, and mental health? So again, the unit values that we presented as suggested and examples, they come from the OMH website. It's the CPT procedure weight. It's located under the clinic restructuring component. It has everything for the Article 31 mental health clinics. That's what we're focused on. I am not familiar with the dental and the medical side of the world in regards to what DOH and other state entities potentially promulgate out there. So I can't answer if that's available on their end. Lisa, David, do you know anything by any chance?
Well, Boris, additionally, I pulled that data from the revenue calculator example that we used in the presentation 2 weeks ago, which is posted to the CTAC website. We will have to go in, because I pulled it off, we made a mistake on that as it relates to the complex care management weighting. So we'll fix that also, but that's in the revenue calculator we used as an example last week, so that's on the website also. But it's the same information from what's on the OMH website also.
Right. So if you go to omh.ny.gov and then down at the bottom of the page, there'll be a thing to go to clinic guidance, and it's the CPT procedure rate and weight schedule. There's a downloadable Excel spreadsheet, and if you're not certain where you fall and what type of clinic, there's also a specific rate sheet with providers by name, and you can confirm where you fall.
Great. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you. So that was our last question that we got through the chat box. I know we got it, and so I just wanted to see if David and Elisa have any last minute comments before we wrap up. Great, thank you. So again, folks, as I said, actually the slide deck is already available. We have recorded this. And it will also be available on our CTAC website. And our next presentation, the last one in this 4-part series, is in 2 weeks on the 26th. And hopefully you'll be able to join us. And as David mentioned during his part, it will focus on dashboarding and the visual presentation of again, focusing on productivity and around productivity. So we hope you can join us. And thank you all for joining us and your questions and comments. Again, thank you, and have a great rest of the day. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.